Hello everyone, and welcome to Chapter 2. And that was the trophy for finishing Chapter 1. So let's continue. February 1865. After breakfast one day, I found myself on my way to the common room with a tray bearing tea. "Tea's ready." I made my way around the room, pouring a cup of tea for each person there, making sure not to spill any. It was a routine I'd begun to feel accustomed to. "Oh, thank you, Yukimura," said Inoue. He gave me a warm smile as I handed him his tea. "There's nothing quite so delicious as hot tea on a cold day." "Thank you." I felt a flush of pride at his words, even though I knew quite well that serving tea was hardly anything impressive. Just the same, I felt as if I was helping out in a way, and that was a nice feeling. It had been a year since I'd first come to Kyoto in search of my father. Living with the Shinsengumi wasn't easy, but they'd helped me look for him. Even after a year of searching, however, I hadn't found anything. Sometimes I felt like it was hopeless, like I'd never find him, and that I should just give up. But the men of the Shinsengumi never gave up. They were always there to cheer me on and keep me going. In a way, I suppose, I'd grown to love living with them. And I'd even been able to repay them for some of their kindness by helping treat the wounded at the Battle of Ikeda-in and during the Hamaguri Rebellion. Little by little, I started to feel like I was accepted, as if perhaps I was beginning to fit in. As strange as it might sound, I was beginning to feel as if I had found a place with the Shinsengumi. Then Hijikata spoke, and his words brought me back to the present. "The Yagi have been good to us so far, but this place is getting crowded." The Yagi are a samurai family who owned the estate where the Shinsengumi established their first headquarters. "True," said Nagakura. "It is getting a little small, especially with all the new guys coming in." "You're going to be getting even more soon, right?" Heisuke was currently in Edo, recruiting more men for the Shinsengumi's ranks. It was always good to have more soldiers, but they were beginning to run out of space at the compound. The rank-and-file soldiers were being packed into smaller and smaller rooms. "If we could move to a bigger place," said Nagakura, "that'd be great. The guys are starting to get a little grumpy about being packed together in those rooms every night." I couldn't exactly offer to share it, but I was starting to feel guilty for having a room of my own. "Easy for us to say," said Okita, "but it's gonna be hard to find someone else who's willing to let us stay at their place. You have something in mind?" Hijikata's smile was almost predatory. "The Nishi-Hongwanji Temple," said Hijikata. "And that is a temple in Kyoto." "Ah," said Okita, "they aren't gonna like that very much. You're thinking we'll just force our way in? Guess I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Hijikata." I didn't leave the compound much, except to go on patrol with the men, so I still didn't know Kyoto very well, and I had no idea what sort of place this Nishi-Hongwanji temple was. It is pretty big, said Harada. I'll give you that, but I really don't think the monks are going to take to a bunch of soldiers living in their temple. Still, the location's great. We'll be able to get out into the city a lot quicker than from out here in Mibu. At the time, the Shinsengumi's headquarters was in the Mibu area, which was on the outskirts of Kyoto. Harada was right in that the current location made it difficult for the Shinsengumi to reach some parts of Kyoto quickly, which reduced their effectiveness. Still, will they really not want us there? Saito only shrugged. The Nishi-Hongwanji Temple has been cooperating with the Choshu. Some of their Ronin have stayed there. Oh, if they supported the Choshu, then that would make the Shinsengumi their enemy. Little wonder then that they would hardly welcome us with open arms. That meant a whole other level of difficulty. Asking for a place to stay was hard enough, but asking that from an enemy? I fell silent, and Saito continued as if I'd never spoken. No doubt they will be less than receptive to our overtures. On the other hand, if we should move into the Nishi-Hongwanji Temple, the Choshu will have one less place to hide their agents. Oh, of course. Not only was the location desirable, but taking the temple would make the enemy's movement more difficult. Whatever problems we had acquiring the temple would likely be worth it. You don't think it's somewhat uncouth, said Sanan, to use force against men of the cloth? There was no hiding his distaste for the idea. Hijikata's voice was level but firm as steel. The Choshu have used the temple to hide their men, and they couldn't have done that without the help of the monks. I agree that the Choshu must be dealt with, but this seems... Sanan's voice trailed off. Although he was still clearly upset, there was little more he could say or do. Kondo said, I agree with Toshi, but I have to concede that Sanan has a point. He nodded solemnly, apparently deep in thought. Impressive as always, Chief Kondo, said a stranger. Only a man with a truly open mind can be so considerate of both his enemies and his allies. Oh, said Kondo, well, it's very kind of you to say so, but I fear my behaviour is simply imprudent, not open-minded. He blushed and coughed in an attempt at nonchalance as Hijikata and Okita scowled in silence at the exchange. The man who had just spoken was Kashitaro Ito, the new deputy commander. He had joined the Shinsengumi only recently. And Ito is a military advisor and deputy commander of the Shinsengumi, loyal to the emperor. Kondo had left Heisuke in Edo and returned early with Ito and some of his men who had come to join the Shinsengumi. He was reputedly a master of the Hokushin Ito sword style and ran a school of his own. When Ito was introduced to the captains, none of them seemed particularly pleased with his addition to the ranks. No sooner had Ito and Kondo left the room than they began to talk amongst themselves. I've heard Ito is an imperial nationalist, said Saito. Why would someone such as him join the Shinsengumi? He's like the Choshu then? Asked Harada. Oh, you really think someone like that can get along with us? Hijikata grunted and pursed his lips for a moment. Kondo's a national loyalist. They might not agree on the shogun and the emperor, but they're both nationalists through and through, said Hijikata. National loyalism is a term for the philosophical and political leanings of those who supported the shogunate and advocated the expulsion of foreigners from Japan. They might disagree about who should run the country, but neither of them wanted a foreign nation exerting its control over their country. Besides, said Hijikata, Kondo's a loyalist, without a doubt, but he has a few imperialist tendencies of his own. Perhaps the different factions weren't quite so staunchly divided as they might appear. Would Kondo and the Shinsengumi work for a future where the shogunate controlled the country but the emperor was still treated with respect? That seemed like a solution that could make everyone happy. If that was the case, then Kondo's version of national loyalism was a wonderful thing. I figure, said Nagakura, the only one of us who'd be very happy about Ito showing up would be Sanan, right? True, said Harada. They do both practice Ito, right? He knows Ito too, doesn't he, said Nagakura, and Sanan is a bit of a loyalist. I wouldn't have guessed that Sanan and Ito had so much in common. His expression didn't suggest that he was particularly happy, though. Yes, I have met Ito, said Sanan. He is well educated and a skilled orator. With such a gifted deputy commander, I suppose that the Shinsengumi has little need for a colonel. Sanan's words hung in the air, heavy and awkward. I didn't understand the ranks of the Shinsengumi, but as far as I could tell, a deputy commander outranked a colonel. With Ito here, said Sanan, there's very little left for me to do. I hadn't even thought of it that way. Sanan felt that Ito was a threat to his own position. An awkward silence fell across the room. So, said Okita, I don't like him. Okita was the first to speak. Yeah, I know what you mean, said Harada. There's something about the way he looks at you. Exactly, said Nagakura. I don't know how to put it, like he's sort of uppity, you know, like he's looking down on you or something. There was a good deal of nodding and agreeing among the three of them for a few moments, while I sat and thought. Truth be told, I didn't feel particularly comfortable around Deputy Commander Ito either. It wasn't that he was a bad person per se, only that he was, how to say it, off-putting. Ito's thin smile had spread across his face when Sanan voiced his objection to Hijikata's plan, and now he turned and spoke. You always think of all the possibilities, Sanan, said Ito. I'm impressed, but I fear you may be overthinking this. It could be a problem, yes, but... His tone was deferential, but it didn't quite match his words. Don't you think a slightly greater problem would be that your left arm is utterly useless? Said Ito. Whatever warmth had remained in the room was abruptly gone. Of course you needn't be useless, even if you can no longer serve as a soldier, said Ito. I'm sure that your wit and foresight will continue to be a great asset to the Shinsengumi and myself. It was as if Ito had taken a knife and driven it straight into Sanan's heart. I saw his shoulders sag almost as if he had been punched in the stomach, and all around the room jaws were set and knuckles turned white. Perhaps I didn't hear you right, Ito, said Hijikata. Hijikata's voice was cold and sharp like the sound of a blade sliding across a whetstone. Sanan's smart, like you said Hijikata. But more than that, he is a swordsman of the Shinsengumi. He is not useless, and he is not replaceable. Hijikata's last words erupted from his mouth in a snarl, and there was no mistaking their meaning. But my arm is, said Sanan. He couldn't even seem to bring himself to finish. No matter how much they might need a swordsman of his skill, Sanan could no longer wield a blade. They both knew his arm would never heal, and Hijikata's desperate defence of his friend had likely only made Sanan feel worse. Oh dear, said Ito. That was terribly rude of me. Truly there could be no better news than hearing that your arm has healed. Ito's smile fooled no one, and Sanan fell silent. God damn it, said Hijikata. He only muttered it under his breath, but I was close enough to hear. Too late, Hijikata had realized his mistake. This was the first time I'd seen Hijikata so worked up. He might have been harsh, but he almost always projected an air of control. Perhaps Sanan's injury worried him enough to allow the mask to slip. Ito, said Kondo. Kondo was clearly choosing his words carefully in a very nearly desperate attempt to change the subject. If you would care to, perhaps you might come and have a look at our training regimen? Ito's eyes narrowed and his mouth curled in a small smile. My, how thoughtful of you. Yes, of course, I would love to have a look, said Ito. Ah, the training room, air heavy with the sweat of men straining to better themselves. Truly a delight. The sweat of men, said Kondo. Oh, yes, I suppose you do have a point. The training room has grown rather musty. Ito could be a very peculiar person. The two men left the room, chatting together as if nothing was wrong, and all eyes turned towards Sanan. Sanan, said Nagakura, don't listen to that asshole, okay? Sanan said nothing. He stood up silently and left the room. Man, I feel bad for him, said Harada. Even the men are avoiding him these days. What? It was the first I'd heard of such a thing, but then again I didn't normally see anyone but the captains. I had no idea. Well, said Nagakura, he's kind of been a jerk lately. I imagine that's why. It wasn't hard for me to see why they would feel that way. Sanan had gotten even worse in the last several weeks. He wasn't always like that, you know, said Harada. Back in the day, he was always acting like he was looking out for everybody. Yeah, said Nagakura, he was real nice, at least on the surface. Nothing left of that now. Do you really mean that? The way they spoke, it sounded as if any kindness Sanan had shown was always a facade. "What the hell does Kondo see in that Ito guy?" said Okita. Okita and Hijikata had largely ignored Nagakura and Harada, but their faces were dark and stormy. It wasn't difficult to guess why. "How the hell would I know?" said Hijikata. "Probably just pulled the wool over Kondo's eyes with some well-spoken bullshit." "Then why don't you go get rid of him, Hijikata?" asked Okita. "Tell him the Shinsengumi doesn't need him." Hijikata let out a frustrated sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. "No way Kondo'll go for that. He adores Ito," said Hijikata. "Besides, when he joined, he brought a bunch of men with him. You think they won't make a stink if we kick him out?" Hijikata was right. He didn't like it any more than Okita did, but they were in a tight spot. "Well, damn," said Okita. "Aren't you supposed to be the demon, the commander from hell? You're supposed to make the impossible happen." "Fine, Soji," said Hijikata. "How about we make you commander, then you can kick Ito and his guys out, right?" Hell no," said Okita. "That's way too much trouble." He gave a grin as he laughed, but when he finished, he sighed and his face fell. It looked like everyone was unhappy with Ito, but none of them knew quite what to do about him. "Do you dislike Ito too, Saito?" I asked. I'd noticed earlier that he'd kept quiet while the others commiserated, and I was curious what he thought. He looked at me for a moment, then spoke. "As an organization grows, it will expand to include people who have differing ideas and points of view." Then was he supporting Ito's appointment to deputy commander? I was about to ask when he continued speaking. "However, if one attempts to force this sort of diversity, then the organization will begin to rot from within." His words hung in the air, a dark omen for the future of the Shinsengumi. It was considerate of Ito to join, but his presence seemed to be a recipe for dissension, if not outright disaster.